I'm here in the office of Dr. Phillip Denney in Lake Forest. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on Marijuana, Compassion, and Common Sense.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Lanny. It's a pleasure to be here.
When people sometimes think about cannabinoid medicine, or they think about marijuana and medicine, they always kind of think of I don't know, like a counterculture and all this kind of stuff. And then here, we come in here and we meet you in your office, and Doctor, you look like you should be getting off a buckboard with the little black medical satchel, which nobody has anymore.
Oh, I have one.
You do have one.
Oh,
do you seriously?
Yes,
How long have you been in medicine? Tell us about your medical
This is
career.
my 30th year
30th
practicing
year.
medicine. Yes. I'm a graduate of USC here in Southern California, and I've spent most of my career in family practice. I started out in a very rural practice in Northern California, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it a great deal. I got to practice cradle to the grave medicine. I delivered babies. I had a large nursing home population. I made house calls and with my little black bag, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. For a variety of reasons, I then went into emergency medicine and practiced for many years doing that. That was also quite fun and challenging. It didn't have quite the relationship joys of having a private family practice, but it was a good thing for me to do. I then practiced occupational medicine, work-related injuries and illnesses, and then I've been doing cannabis-related medicine now since late 1999.
So cannabis medicine was really just the tail end of your
Oh, yes.
of your career so far.
Yes.
And if someone told you, let's say in 1985, that marijuana would be beneficial medically for some of your patients, what would you have told them?
Oh, I would have understood that quite well in 1985. I think most physicians, a physician would have to be living under a rock to not to know that many of their patients use cannabis as medicine and to recognize its benefit. The issue, as I'm fond of saying, is not the medical issues. I think these are very straightforward. Cannabis is a very non-toxic and very appropriate alternative for many patients to substitute for many other drugs we commonly use. The issue is not that physicians don't think cannabis is useful or don't recognize that their patients use it. The issue is that they're very frightened of the political repercussions of even talking about this. As I'm sure you know, cannabis has been illegal in this country for close to 60 years, and I would argue that this is based on our government lying to us about this, and they continue to lie to us about this. I think the evidence is very clear to anybody that takes the time to look at the literature that cannabis is a safe and effective alternative for many people.
But now, so back in '85, you knew about the medical benefits of cannabis, but you weren't doing anything about it at that time.
Oh, no. I think that most physicians in our society, we of course, Lanny, have a very privileged place in our society, and most physicians recognize the privilege of practicing medicine and are very loath to do anything that's politically controversial that might interfere with that. We of course make a handsome living in our society. We have a lot of responsibility, and we're rewarded quite well for that. And very few physicians, I think, really want to do anything to put that at risk, even though they know that cannabis is a very reasonable medicine for people. I think you've hit on one of the major problems here, and that is that physicians in general are very willing to sacrifice the well-being of their patients on the altar of political correctness about this issue. They know very well that cannabis is not a dangerous drug, that it is very helpful. They know their patients use it, and yet they don't want to talk about it because they're very frightened of the political consequences. And I think that you hit on that's a very important issue there.
What finally sort of got you? You knew it was good, but you didn't. But at some point in 1999, suddenly you decided cannabis is something. What happened?
Well, there was a couple of events that occurred right about the same time. The first one is I was sick of practicing occupational medicine, to tell you the truth. Dealing with insurance companies has never been my forte. I really enjoy dealing with patients instead of paper. So I was not happy with where I was in my career. At the same time, I ran into another physician who was writing cannabis recommendations, who educated me about the politics of it. And at the same time, I had a family member that discovered the benefits of cannabis to treat chronic pain for actually a very serious fracture of the cervical spine. So when all those kinds of, kind of the planets kind of aligned at that time, and I became very interested in exploring it. Well, when I took a look at it, it became very obvious that this was an opportunity that required a physician willing to stand up and tell the truth about this. And while I did so with a great deal of trepidation, I think that looking back on it, it was a really good thing to do. This is a fun practice.
A fun practice. Could you explain that?
Oh, I enjoy it. Well, cannabis patients, by and large, are great people. I would start by saying that. Cannabis patients, by and large, are patients that are comfortable and happy and reasonable and not very demanding, and so they're good people to take care of.
Is that because that's what they're like, or is it the cannabis helps them become that way?
I think both.
Both. Okay.
I think the personality type who finds benefit from cannabis is the personality that tends to be that way. And of course, cannabis is well known to help induce those kinds of character traits. People who use cannabis tend to be fairly mellow. They tend not to get upset very easily. They tend to manage their anger well, and so forth. So I think that this is a fun practice. As I'm fond of saying, nobody dies in my office. Nobody pukes on my shoes. Nobody bleeds on me. I'm not doing CPR in my exam rooms. So from a medical point of view, particularly for a fellow with my kind of background, this is wonderful. But I have to tell you that the work of this practice is not seeing the patients. As I said, that's the fun part. The work is dealing with the politics. I deal with judges, I deal with prosecutors and defense attorneys, I deal with parole officers, I deal with child protective services, I deal with employers. The list just goes on and on and on. So the work of this practice is really dealing with the politics, the repercussions. I have a large patient population. Some of them get in trouble from time to time, and that's what I deal with.
Give us an example of one or two of the repercussions you've experienced as a doctor who writes recommendations for medicinal marijuana.
Repercussions for me or for my patients?
Have you had any repercussions?
Oh, yes. I get, as a result of what I do, I get called to testify in court regularly. And when I get called to testify in court, it's a pretty amazing process. Again, I've been a physician for 30 years, and I have never been treated with such lack of respect as I am about this issue. Heretofore, my opinion was gold. If I said somebody needed morphine, then by golly, they got morphine, and there was no question asked about it. But when I recommend cannabis as medicine, all of a sudden I'm labeled as a quack. I'm a profiteer. I sell snake oil off the back of wagons. I'm somehow immediately suspect because of what I recommend. And as a result of that, when I have to go to court, they spend a great deal of effort to try and discredit me and make me look bad. And that's very daunting and quite challenging. And I have to tell you, I've had to develop a very thick skin about that. I tend to be sensitive about people who think I'm a bad person, and so this has been quite difficult. And as I say, the patients are wonderful. There's not a day that goes by in my practice, Lanny, that I'm not moved to tears by a patient with these amazing, compelling stories of how they've managed to persevere in spite of just daunting challenges. And insofar as cannabis helps them manage those things, this has been very rewarding in that regard. So that's what gives me the joy. I don't really enjoy the political ramifications and the sparring that goes on and the demands of my time by the courts and attorneys and all of that. But it comes with the territory.
Well, Doctor, I want to explore some more with you about the beneficial aspects it makes people who are patients like that and why you enjoy this. But we've kind of run out of time for this segment. Can you join us on our next show and we'll continue the conversation?
I'd love to.
Great. Thank you very much. So if you're at Dr. Phillip Denney's office in Lake Forest, California, this is Lanny Swerdlow saying back to our studios.